Good evening and welcome to the October 14th, 2021 Parks and Recreation Special Video Meeting. I am Jody McCarthy, Parks and Recreation Chair. In accordance with Proclamation 20-28.10 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order, tonight's Parks and Recreation Commission meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being recorded and will broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. City staff, Jesse Bond, Jason Kintner, Ryan Daly, Paul West, Aileen Summergren, Merrill Thomas Schott, Council Member Liaison Jake Jacobson, and consultants Steve Dew and Jean Akers are participating in tonight's meeting remotely. Other public audience members are listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Welcome to all and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, please turn on your microphones. Will the city staff please call the roll?
Chair McCarthy.
Present.
Vice Chair Struck.
Present.
Commissioner Cohen.
Here.
Commissioner Birkenwald.
Present.
Commissioner Westberg.
Present.
Commissioner Markson. Commissioner Markson, thought I saw you on.
Sorry, I'm here. I was
Okay.
muted twice.
Thanks, Sarah. And Commissioner Burstein. Thanks.
We also want to acknowledge that tonight we also have Elizabeth Mitchell from the Arts Council and Marie Bender from the Open Space Conservancy joining us tonight to be part of the discussion. Before we start the business of tonight's meeting, I want to suggest a few rules to help the meeting run smoothly. If a commissioner has a question, please use the raise hand feature. I will do my best to recognize commissioners in the order in which hands are raised. Everyone will be asked to limit himself or herself to one question and to one clarifying question, if necessary, so that each commissioner has a chance to ask a question before a commissioner is given another chance to ask a question. Additionally, prior to speaking, please state your name for those listening in on the meeting. Tonight's agenda will not include in-person public appearances in accordance with Proclamation 20-28.11 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order. However, individuals wishing to speak live during the appearances portion of our meeting may do so by telephone or using the Zoom teleconferencing application, provided, however, they registered their desire to speak with the city administration staff by 4 p.m. today. Our city admin staff will call on you by name or telephone number when it is your turn to speak. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the Parks and Recreation Commission. All remarks will be addressed to the commission as a whole and not to individual commission members or staff members. If any person makes personal, impertinent, or slanderous remarks, or who becomes boisterous, threatening, or personally abusive while addressing the commission, I will request that that person leave the meeting. When it is your turn to address the commission, be sure to speak audibly and state your name for the record. Your comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I will provide you with a 30-second and 15-second warning when your time is about to expire. City staff, is there anyone who has signed up for appearances that wishes to address the commission?
Thanks, Chair McCarthy. We do have one person. I'm going to let Meg Lippert in just a moment. Stand by. Okay, looks like she's connecting here. Meg, whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Good evening. My name is Meg Lippert. I'm speaking to you today in support of the proposal to expand the native plant garden in Mercerdale Park, which is on your agenda this evening. To put this request into historical perspective, The Mercer Island Native Plant Garden, located in Mercerdale Park adjacent to the recycling center, was used in the past for educational purposes and environmental experimentation, including the use of rainwater stored in barrels from the recycling center roof for irrigation during the dry season. The Mercer Island Native Plant Garden includes wooded trails and a designated wetland. Native plant experts have recently identified at least 29 different native species growing within the borders of the native plant garden. These species include evergreen and deciduous trees, shrubs, vines, herbaceous flowering plants, ferns, and ground covers. The native plant garden provides the only level woodland area easily accessible from the Mercerdale Park Great Lawn and Circular Pathway. Although threatened in recent years by various building projects proposed by members of the community and/or by city council members, since 2015, a group of several dozen volunteers has invested over 900 volunteer hours with the guidance and support of the Mercer Island Parks Department to clear the land of invasive species, to plant hundreds of seedlings of native species, to install permanent plant labels to educate the community, and to print and distribute hundreds of color-illustrated native plant guides to visitors. Unfortunately, the native plant garden sign that was installed by the Mercer Island Parks Department several years ago to highlight the area was removed last month by an unauthorized person or persons, and in spite of an extensive search of the area by Parks Department staff, it was not recovered. This follows a pattern of vandalism in the area. The plan before you, expansion of the native garden, would not only reclaim unused and deteriorating impervious surface in public parkland and return the area under consideration to green space, but also would highlight the north entrance to the native garden and could make the area appear less neglected and less appealing to vandals. The area of the proposed expansion of the native garden includes approximately half of the pavement surrounding the recycling center, the portion south of the recycling center porch, measuring 37 feet north to south and 85 feet east to west. The western portion of this asphalt floods in heavy rain and is essentially wetland, an extension of the seasonal stream wetland to its south. Several creative proposals that are unique features and have educational value for our community have been floated for this area once the asphalt and the decrepit trailer are removed. Two features that could have educational ramifications for islanders are a rain garden in the wetland portion on the west side adjacent to the hillside, and a pollinator wildflower meadow on the east side close to the Mercerdale Park circular path. Between these two sections, the pathway could provide a welcoming entrance to the native plant garden from the north. These educational demonstration gardens, populated with native species, could even be enjoyed by picnicking islanders if a couple of picnic tables were added to the covered porches of the recycling center. Repurposing this area to serve as educational resources for our island seems a fitting way to honor the heritage of former islanders, while providing pleasure and knowledge about pollinators and wetland management to current and future residents. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Meg. Okay, the only item of business is the pros plan, focusing tonight on reviewing the results from recent community engagement, the draft capital facilities plan, and the draft 6-year capital improvement plan. We recommend, we welcome City Manager Jesse Bond.
Good evening, commissioners. Thank you again for having me tonight. We already introduced our Arts Council member and Open Space Conservancy Trust member. I just wanted to mention that we will have representatives from both of those boards with us for the rest of the year when we're discussing pros plan items. It is not practical to make all of those meetings and do this process with everybody. So thank you, Marie, and I believe it's, I've lost you. Elizabeth, there you are, for joining us tonight. We appreciate you. So tonight I'm gonna pretty quickly here turn it over to Steve Dew, who is a consultant on our pros plan. He's got a PowerPoint he put together walking through the survey results from survey number 2 and some feedback we had from our second virtual public meeting. From there, where I'd like to spend most of our time this evening is on the 20-year capital facilities plan. And what I'd like to do when we leave tonight is have close to a final recommendation from the Parks Commission for that list. The staff we've mostly added our projects, but we'd like to get anything else that has majority support from the commission added tonight. And then we'll take a look at the 6-year CIP, but I'm not sure we're going to have time to really do a deep dive this evening. That'll be coming back to you in November. So Steve, why don't you take it away and tell us what we heard from the second survey?
Thank you, Jesse, and good evening, everybody. Again, Steve Dew, Conservation Techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and keep my fingers crossed that the technology works. So bear with me for a moment. Let me get this up and running. All right. So can I see a head nod or something from someone? Okay, great. It's always good. All right, good to know it works. So as Jesse noted, I'm going to review the survey from survey number 2, survey data from survey number 2. And just to start out with the reminders of what this survey was, it was the second survey for the PROS plan. And the first one was conducted back in February and March of 2020. So right on the onset of COVID. And it was similarly structured to survey number 2 in that it was both a mail survey and an online survey. It had a 2,500 random sample mail out, as did survey number 2. But survey number 2 was fielded basically between second half of August through middle September, so about 4 or 5 weeks. It was out there. As like with survey number 1, it was a dual function survey. So it was a mail out survey, went to a random sample of 2,500 households, and that is a different sample from the first survey. It's not the same set of 2,500 households. We shuffled the deck, so to speak, and sent it to a different set of 2,500. We received back 20% of the surveys that went out. So 505 responses came back from the mail survey. And as with the first survey, which also had a 21% response rate, that's phenomenal. So I think first off, you should be happy that you're getting such great feedback from the community. Second, with the second survey here, we also did the online version for the community at large. And for that, we received 824 additional surveys. So in aggregate, 1,329 surveys from survey 2. So survey number 1 had about 1,500, survey 2, another 13. So you're pushing 3,000 responses in aggregate between the 2 surveys. So you've got a lot of data from the broader community about parks and recreation. And I think, again, you should be happy with the level of interest that the community put forward in getting data back to us that we can use in this plan. Just as a reminder, the survey data between the mail out survey and the online only survey was kept separate. So we can compare and contrast the data between the 2. And the surveys also included some fairly basic demographic type information consistent with survey 1 that captured information about the respondents' age group, where they live on the island, and whether they have kids under the age of 18 in the household. So again, that data was segregated between the online and the mail out surveys. So again, we could look for variations in the data between all of the data sets we've got. So diving into the data itself, we had a couple warm-up questions, just like we did for the first survey. And in part, we wanted to retest a couple of questions to see if there was any change in people's behavior or usage of cities' parks. And the first question here is about level of satisfaction. And 93% feel that they're either very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with the value they receive from Mercer Island Parks and Recreation. And that is identical to what we captured in 2020. So again, it's good to retest some information, and it's also good to see consistency in level of value from the community. We also asked a question about visitation or usage. How often do you go out to parks, recreation areas, trails? And here, again, with a comparison between this current survey and the older survey from 2020, Usage is about the same between then and now, but the usage here is about 93% on a monthly basis, whereas it was 95% pre-COVID. But we also asked a follow-up question regarding whether your usage changed during COVID, whether you visited more often, it was the same, or decreased. You can see there in the corner that about half of the respondents said it increased. And that's a good thing because it gets people out into the open air and gets them out of their houses and off of Zoom. But it is good to see such strong usage of parks and open spaces. So transitioning into some more details based on survey 2. So part of the intent of the second survey was to refine some questions, to really dive a little deeper into some core priorities, and to force people to give us information about what's really needed. And one way we did that is with a question that basically asked, what are the most needed improvements? And they were provided a list, as you can see on the screen, and they were told they could select up to 3. And there was also a catch-all option of other, where they could write in responses. And as you see in the chart, connecting the gaps in the trail system came out at as a clear winner with 44%. Plurality of respondents supported that, followed by expanding or maintaining restoration in open space areas, and then repairing and upgrading waterfront areas and facilities such as docks and piers. So those top 3 are the strong contenders. As I mentioned, there was an other response, and in that other response, I'll touch on in a moment, but it highlighted pickleball and a few other specific things that people had interest in. But before I transition, I just want to say that those top core areas of trails, maintenance, waterfront, and in this case also restrooms, are carryovers from the first survey to a degree, but also carryovers from the first virtual public meeting we did back in May, in terms of some of the core things that people felt were of value and of importance. Looking at the other option, there were a good number of write-in responses to this, and tried to categorize them and capture the information kind of thematically. This is not listed in a specific order. This is just noting kind of the top frequency responses. So in that group of other, which was the second highest rating, again, there was a strong interest in some specific improvements, such as pickleball or converting tennis and basketball courts to pickleball. Notations about enhancing maintenance, such as playground replacements, trail maintenance, repaving. Also, the fourth bullet down, trash management, whether it's adding trash cans or picking up trash more frequently. And I understand from staff that during COVID, the frequency of trash collection was reduced. So seeing that come through in the survey response, that makes sense. Other things noted in that other category include off-leash dog management and enforcing leash law, which I'm sure you've heard about over the past several years. And then security and safety management, such as homelessness encampments and noxious weed management. So just to recap, the top most needed improvements really are about connecting trails or trail system completion, repairing and upgrading waterfront areas, docks, piers, maintenance, restoration, open space, and restroom facilities. And the notion of trails is again something that comes up frequently in survey responses here that I'll touch on in a moment, but it's also very consistent with what was from the first survey. In the first survey, there was strong interest in having trails or having access to trails and people using trails as an activity for walking and biking. So another question we posed was one about importance of specific types of recreation amenities. And in this question, we listed out about 20 different amenity types that people could select from. They were asked whether each one is very important, somewhat important, less important, not important, etc. So they could go through that whole list and select how important each is. Then we went back to ask, okay, now look at this list again and pick your top 3. So this chart, or these pair of charts, represents the tabulation of the entirety, not the top 3. I'll touch on that in a moment. So because the list is so long, I broke it in half and split it on the screen. So I broke it to the top 10 to the left and top or second 10 to the right. And it is in descending order based on very important, but you can see by aggregating the very important and somewhat important, the 2 blue bars, you get a real sense of the types of amenities that people feel strongly about. So again, in the top 5, 2 of the top 5 are related to trails. Walking and jogging trails is the top 1, and then bike lanes, bike paths is number 4 there. Open space and natural areas is very strong, and restrooms is very strong. And again, it's consistent with what we just saw in the previous question about most needed improvements. So there's a sense that, for example, there is a need for improvements for restrooms. And in this question, restrooms are an important facility. So you can start to see that there is, again, consistency in the responses, and it's also consistent with what we saw in the first survey. So the top tier really is about kind of core amenities. If you think about the park system, providing a broad set of recreation opportunities for people, having trails, having the open space to be in for those trails, having some convenience like restrooms and parking, playgrounds, those are kind of the core functional pieces of a park system. Beyond that, you start to get into more specialized amenities. You get into off-leash areas, pickleball, water facilities for boating. And then on the other side of the chart, it really gets even more specific, going down the list: tennis courts, sport courts, bike skills, picnic areas, etc. One thing I do want to note is that, for example, with all of the various sport amenities or facilities, I should say, pickleball courts came in as the strongest of any of the sport amenities, and it was by a factor of about 2 relative to the other types of sport courts. And there was a strong contingent of picklers who took the survey, so that might lead something into the data. But it's also important to note that on the island, there's a fair number of either public or private tennis courts, but there are not the same number of options for pickleball. So again, that latent demand is showing up in the data. So as I mentioned earlier, people took the list and then they went back to the list a second time and selected their top 3. So the top 3 in the chart are consistent with the previous list I showed you: walking, open space, and restrooms in the same order. No surprise. But the top 10 is also the same. So again, we're seeing that people value the same things that they're noting. And again, pickleball outpaced the other sport courts by a factor of about 2x. Turning to water-oriented recreation options, the question was about how interested are you in this selection of water-oriented recreation amenities or programs? And it ranged from things like kayak and paddleboard rentals through program type things of classes and lessons. So you can see again in the data, ranked in descending order. strong interest in kayak and paddleboard rental options. And again, it wasn't specified whether that would be city run or concessionaire run, but the interest is there to have access to watercraft off of the various points of the island. Close behind that, with almost 50%, you've got water-oriented summer camps that could include sailing and kayaking, sailing classes, swimming classes, and rowing or crew programs. So all of those show fairly strongly. There was some variation in the data where the people who were between 35 and 54 or households with kids had stronger interest in swim lessons and kayak paddleboard rentals, and also the summer camps, the water-oriented summer camps. So following the water-specific question, we had a more generalized question about recreation program types. And in this, we listed water programs, but we also listed more common or traditional recreation program areas, such as, arts and crafts, education, performing arts, things for youth, things for older adults. And again, you can see here that interest in water-oriented programming, boating programs specifically, sailing, kayaking, paddleboarding, came out at the top of the list, pretty closely followed by fitness programs. But in there also is a strong contingent of respondents who had a perspective to be more interested in youth-oriented sports or summer camp or after-school programs. And again, those were households with kids, obviously, and also those between the age of 35 and 54. Interest in arts and performing arts was also strong in this data. Another question that we asked was a basic one about, is there enough parkland today? And is there enough parkland in the future? So it was a question where we crafted a phrase, is there enough? And people then responded by saying that they either strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with that statement. And what's interesting is that if you're thinking about parkland today, a strong majority, nearly 70%, feel that there is enough land today. But looking to the future, and we didn't define the future, we didn't say 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. We just said future. That number drops off pretty substantially to be under 50%. So there seems to be that some acknowledgement that as Mercer Island grows in time, or as time passes by, that maybe there's not enough parkland to serve the needs going forward. As I may have noted with past discussions about surveys, we only know what people have said. We don't know the whys of how they respond. So for this one in particular, we don't know why they think that there might be a need for additional land in the future. We just know that they are acknowledging that there might need to be additional land purchased going forward. And then we asked a follow-up question, which was about, well, if future land is purchased by the city, what sorts of acquisitions are the most important? And this one was a forced rank question where we offered 5 specific things and they had to pick them 1 through 5. So identifying or acquiring property for habitat and open space, which could include trails, was coming in at number 1, and then new or expanded waterfront access, and then active recreation areas such as athletic fields and playgrounds was number 3. So in that top 3, you see very strong relation to, again, some of the data that I've already covered, which is interest in waterfront, interest in open space and conservation areas, and for some people, interest in sport or playground space. And I should note also that, again, the subgroup data showed that respondents between 35 and 54, and also households with kids, were more strongly in favor of the waterfront access and the active recreation spaces for future acquisitions. So moving to a question about revenue options. This was one we previously discussed past commission meetings, which is recognizing that there might be a need for additional revenue to come in to support some of the programs and areas of interest from the community. So we wanted to test a few ideas. And for this one, it was a listing of 7 specific types of revenue options. And people were identifying them as either they were very supportive through not supportive of those revenue options. It should be noted that of the 7 options, 6 of the 7 were at least somewhat supported by a majority. But really the strongest options of support include increasing the rental scheduling at the community center, instituting concessionaires, whether it's vendors or food carts, and also charging fees for outfield fence, banners or advertisements. Those seem to be maybe some of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. But it's also important to note that we put an option in there about a paid parking program for Luther Burbank Park, and that one was not supported. So we had about 60% who were not in favor of that option, which is an interesting one because there's also a lot of comment about at least seasonal off-island usage, and that might be one way to manage or mitigate that, but there seems to be very little support among the survey respondents for a paid parking program. About wrapping it up on the survey summary here, we also had a open-ended question that let people write in whatever they wanted. And it was basically a question that stated, if there was one improvement you could make to Mercer Island Parks and Recreation, what would it be? And in looking over all of that data, and it was a very long list of responses, and we again categorized and summarized here on the screen what the takeaways were. So a lot of comments were written in about improving maintenance at existing parks, trails, and open spaces. And that includes vegetation management, cleanliness, etc. Creating more trail connections. A lot of folks wrote in interest in expanding the trail network, making more connections, and just following up on their interests that were noted earlier in the survey. But also there was a fair amount of write-in for purchasing additional open space, providing pickleball, additional waterfront access, again, and providing more larger playgrounds. Again, some of the same things that we have seen from the survey data previously, as well as support for replacing Luther Burbank Dock, and again, managing off-leash usage, whether it's through providing additional off-leash parks or enforcing leash laws. And there were a good number of write-ins about leash law management. And then to a slightly lesser degree, upgrading sport fields and sport amenities, whether it's through turf or lighting. So here I wanted to just transition a little bit and kind of step back from survey 2 and think about survey 1 and survey 2 and public meeting 1 and public meeting 2, and kind of capture some of what I see as some of the takeaways. And I broke it into 4 core categories here, as you can see. And with regard to waterfront infrastructure, there has been consistent strong support for replacing docks and piers and value put toward that waterfront infrastructure. And it's consistently been in the top 3 of amenities. And at the public meeting most recently, While it was only a small sample, it also was strongly supported as something of value for the community of maintaining and repairing and replacing that waterfront infrastructure. So it aligns with, or all of these responses align with the notion of maintain what you have, and that sentiment that it's more important to manage, maintain what you have than necessarily build new or expand. But also with waterfront, it's about also waterfront access, not just managing piers and docks, but it's accommodating additional access to the water, whether that's through street ends or through water-oriented programming or concessionaire options for example, kayak or paddleboard rentals. With regard to trails, as you saw through this survey, and you might remember from the first survey, there was, again, strong and consistent interest in having trails as a facility and people using trails as an activity. Also, the notion of improving maintenance to existing trails was one that was noted in the open-ended response in the survey, but strong interest in just finding ways to create more connections and expand the overall trail network, which could require some coordination with right-of-way corridors and public works sort of linkages. But also within the notion of trails and pathways is the idea of signage, wayfinding, and communications. So people know how to connect point A to point B, what sorts of degree of difficulty a trail might be, or just the broader picture of what is the system. On the side of parks and open space, there from the second public meeting and to a lesser degree from the first public meeting from May, there seemed to be some openness toward providing additional recreation opportunities. And that includes things like splash pads or pickleball. There's strong support for playground renovations and replacements, and also the inclusion of inclusive or all accessibility play areas. There are concerns that need to be addressed going forward, and that includes a bike skills area and its function and location, as well as, again, as I've noted, leash law management. And then on the user convenience side, again, there's data that suggests there's a need to upgrade and expand restroom facilities, provide for more or larger playgrounds, accommodate water usage such as kayak or boat rentals, and again, broader system thinking of signage, wayfinding, communications, and information on the internet to let people know where they can go and what they can do. And I'll take a pause there. I'm gonna, well, you let me know if I need to stop sharing the screen to have a conversation, and I'll turn it back to Jesse if there's, or to Jody.
Actually, Steve, why don't you go ahead and stop sharing so we can. All right, they're in. Well, I thought this would be a good moment to stop and check in with all of you. We've concluded most of our, let's call it our formal public engagement for the PROS plan. Based on what Steve shared and certainly recalling all your previous conversations, what were your takeaways? And also I would invite you to comment on where we might have gaps in terms of who we've heard from. I think for those of you that have worked with me for a long time, I'm always thinking about the youth and teens who don't necessarily show up at meetings, but they definitely have an opinion about what they like in their park system. So I'm mindful that we need to be thinking about that group. With that, I will turn it back to you, Chair McCarthy.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Cohen has his hand up.
Don Cohen. I don't have a substantive comment right now, but I wanted to compliment Steve and staff on the presentation that Steve just did, because I went over the materials that I picked up and looked at it online several times, but the way that you sort of consolidated it and came up with common themes was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll also make sure that if it's not already there, Meryl will make sure the PowerPoint makes it to our Let's Talk page as well.
Good. Vice Chair Struck.
Yes, thank you. And to echo, yes, Peter Struck, to echo Commissioner Cohen's comments, thanks to Steve and the staff for putting this together. I really appreciated the kind of the adding kind of the survey one from March of 20, because I think that if you take the two documents together, you can glean a lot more information than just the single document. So I really appreciate that. And I think there's probably some more work to be done, because I think there's some more questions that from both surveys that kind of that 1 and 1 equal 3 kind of approach. But I just had kind of at the top, kind of at the 50,000 foot level, kind of 3 takeaways that I think about. One is that, and it really comes back to that first question that was asked in both surveys, and kind of what's your satisfaction level of the community. And in both cases, it's well over 90%. So that gives me a lot of comfort that, you know, we're starting from a position of strength as we think about, well, what should we add, subtract, et cetera, et cetera. Second, and again, it was pointed out, if you look at kind of the level or the types of amenities and activities and so forth, the way I looked at it was that, and I think Steve used the term core amenities, but I think that those activities that everybody can do generally rank in a higher priority. And then as you kind of get down to activities that are either more restricted or have a very specific interest group, they get less and less. So I think, again, that it's that balance that we need, but I think that it's important that we keep that in mind, that the kind of the real low impact kind of basic things everybody does, you know, out walking in the parks kind of things is what people really, really like. And then last, I think that the question that talked about, you know, the amount of parkland in the future and so forth, I think that's really a key one that we really need to focus on. And, you know, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later when we get into the capital facilities project list and so forth, because I think that that's something that if we're not aware of it, by the time it becomes an issue, it's probably going to be too late. So I'll stop there and let others speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I put my own hand up. Jody McCarthy. I just wanted to expand on what Peter was saying and also jump on what Jesse was saying. And I just wanted to say that, you know, people with especially little kids are really busy. And I do feel like that's a group that we could be missing. The school age kids, families might not necessarily be clued in. I know MIPA does a really great job of getting information out, but I think specifically, you know, the K through 12, those could be a demographic that we aren't hearing as much from with our survey. So that's something to be mindful about, that those people are active users of the park, but maybe using it in a different way that we're not quite capturing with this. And thank you. And I see that Elizabeth has her hand up.
Hi, thanks. Sorry, I'm multitasking a little bit tonight, so I don't have my camera on. But I will say, as a parent of a 4th and 6th grader, that I do think that we are lacking in reaching out to kind of that school age children. I only found out about it because of Erin Vivian, who is on the Arts Council and recruited me to it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even realized we had the survey available. So that's a really good point, Jody. And then the other part of it, if the first survey, you know, there was art mentioned, but the way that it was mentioned in the survey, and I myself took the survey, made it sound more like sculpture and art installments. But later in the survey, it mentioned an interest in performing arts, and that seemed to be higher. And so as the Arts Council representative, I would love to have something in the survey that kind of asked, what are people looking for? You know, music, mostly music in the park was a hit for the one that actually got to happen this past summer. I know there's been a request to return to Shakespeare in the park at Luther Burbank. So it would be great to get some questions in that survey that included questions about the arts, so that you know, we can know how to better serve the community in that way. Thanks.
Commissioner McCarthy, may I respond just real quick?
Yes.
Elizabeth, I just wanted to be clear, we won't be running a 3rd survey at this point, but in the first survey, we had a question that, and I'll have Meryl make sure she gets that to you. It was all of the special events we had done in the past and which were most supported. So that it doesn't directly align with what you're looking for, but I think it gets you pretty close. So we'll make sure to get you that document so you can take a look at it and take it back to the Arts Council as well.
Thank you so much.
All right, Commissioner Westberg.
Thank you, Jody. Yeah, I just wanted to add to some of the comments that have been made about the makeup of the response. It seemed to me, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me in the first survey and in this survey, the mail-in survey respondents skewed somewhat older than the online survey respondents. And in both instances, and particularly in this one, I just, in response to that question about age, I just note that 25% or fewer of the respondents fell in the age 34 to 44 or younger. And those are the families with small children, and those are the families with kids in youth sports and things like that, that if you were looking for a group that may be underrepresented in terms of these responses, I think we would need to look there.
And if I could just comment on the demographics a little bit. So a couple things. One is that it is fairly normal for the surveys we've seen over the last many years where we do kind of a dual process, mail and also online, that the mail survey respondents do skew older. That's just an interesting factoid. I can't explain why, other than people who are over a certain age enjoy getting mail and actually return it. So there's something, I'm in that group too, because I love taking the surveys. But also that the corollary is also true, that with an online survey, it does skew younger. So that's one side note, but really, if you're looking in aggregate, if you're combining that 1,300 responses for survey number 2, the age group breakdown is pretty consistent with the census data population based on the population over 20. So if you're looking at just the percentages of people who fall in those age groups, starting at age 20 and going beyond, the relative proportions are pretty consistent. And that's noted, I think, on the second or third page of the summary report for survey 2. So that's one side note, that the aggregate data does reflect consistency with the demographics of the city. The other point, and this ties to Chair McCarthy's comment, is with regard to households with or without kids. So the mail survey actually hit it on the head with regard to aligning with the census data. So census data shows that there's about 34% of households with kids under 18 in Mercer Island. And that's exactly what we got on the mail survey. So not to say that every response is falling within a specific category there, but that shows that we are reaching out to a sample that aligns with the broader community. Secondly, when we again aggregate the data for that 1,300 responses, we're at about 550 households that have kids. So that's just a huge number. You're not going to get that in a public meeting. So again, check the box that makes you feel good about that. And what that represents is 45% of all of the respondents to survey 2 are households with kids. So again, if the census data says it's about 34, 35, but the total response is 45, we're doing pretty good at collecting data from households with kids. So again, there's always options to do more work and to reach out more directly. And I should also note that when the survey was promoted, it was promoted online through the school district, through MIPA, through Let's Talk, and pretty much every other way to do it we could think of. So we tried to get it out as broadly as possible.
Great. Does anybody else have any comments, or should we continue with the Steve's presentation?
So at this point, Chair McCarthy, I'll just jump in and say the next part of our discussion will be moving on to the 20-year capital facilities plan. So I wanted to just one more opportunity. If you had any other takeaways you wanted to share, anything you need us to follow up on, now would be a good time. And, please keep in mind, right, as commissioners, where we see gaps in the data, perhaps a group that was underrepresented, that's why you're here, right? The city council appointed you to represent the community. And even though we try real hard to get everyone involved, it's often challenging. So that's, I just want to put a plug in. That's where you will come into play as you make final recommendations on the capital project list and the policies that are part of the PROS plan.
All right, great. Vice Chair Struck has another comment.
Yes, thank you. This kind of popped up when Steve was going through his presentation, and we've talked a lot about pickleball. And I kind of was maybe somewhat reluctant to make this comment, but not to get the pickleballers mad at me. But yes, there, in terms of it's very important. But if you looked at the other percentage of not important, it was an outlier. So if you were to force rank those activities by what's not important, I mean, pickleball would fall way below what it was. So I think you've got probably a more larger kind of split between not important and very important for that one piece. And again, I think that's a reflection of it. Probably is that's a fairly new sport, and probably a lot of people just don't know about it, and so therefore it's not important. So just another little quirk of the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cohen.
Yes, Don Cohen. I had sent an email to staff. It was about a comment in a footnote describing the virtual public meeting that said, due to a technical issue, one of the questions asked at the public meeting was missing one of the responses about building new connecting trails in existing parks to link walking routes throughout the island. There was one included about acquiring new land in order to do that. And I had asked a question in an email about whether it was important to try to get that. I guess I am assuming that Steve would say, but I'm interested, or Jesse would say, the information that we have overall from the surveys and this and the in-person meetings and so forth makes it unnecessary to do anything to try to correct that, to try to identify who the people were who were at that public meeting and ask them that. But since I emailed the question, I know that everybody's got a lot to do, but I didn't get an answer on that one. So
I apologize, Commissioner Cohen. I'm not sure I received that, or it's in the mess of my inbox. Let me just share quickly what happened at the public meeting for those of you that weren't there. We had polling questions set up, and I think we were at question 5 of 6 or something, and it locked up and we couldn't poll. So we put everyone into their breakout sessions. While they were there, we quickly, our technician quickly retyped the poll questions, and when they typed them, they missed one of the responses. We still ran the poll question. To your point, I think we have sufficient data on trails that we can take the data as it is flawed, but I don't think it's worth any follow-up. And I do apologize. I did not see your email ahead of the meeting.
thank you.
Yeah, I have to say, Don, I didn't see it either, but maybe you just sent it just to staff. Marie has her hand up.
Sorry. I just one reflection on the census data. I'm glad to hear that our responses reflect our census. But I don't know, and I hope that we are thinking about the future. For example, I live in a neighborhood that is very young. And I see lots of small children moving in all the time. So I'm hoping that part of our skew is to say not only what's in our community today, but where do we think our community is going? And what can we do to address their needs? Because I mean, I have sat in a lot of meetings even before there was a Parks Commission, discussing what young people would want to have in terms of ball fields and things like that. But, you know, something that I didn't see in all this is our school system provides a lot of recreation space. And I don't know whether that is sort of reflected in the concept of what do we have available on the island. Because, I mean, I think we're sort of unusually dependent on school department properties to provide things like ball fields. So maybe that's something that we ought to be looking at in terms of what do we have and what do we need. And then when we get to the capital improvement section, I think we need to sort of think about the juxtaposition between the very strong support for trail systems and open space, and what do we actually have in our capital budget proposal. So that's for now.
Thank you. Commissioner Cohen, you have a comment? No? Okay.
No, sorry.
All right. Back to you, Jesse and Steve.
All right, Steve just has a handful of slides to help tease up this next conversation that involves a ginormous spreadsheet. So let's start with the PowerPoint and then we'll take a look at our project list.
Yep. Bear with me here. There.
Mhm.
Is it up? Can you see it, Jesse? Oh,
Right.
she just went muted.
Yep, we got it, Steve.
Okay.
All right. Steve, I'll take this and you'll jump in.
Yeah.
That's great. So we have two documents that we're going to start doing a little bit of a deeper dive into tonight and probably over the next couple of meetings. Just zooming out for a minute, capital planning. These are your construction projects, your planning documents, generally guided by community input, as we've just discussed tonight. Also certainly strongly informed by the physical needs or deficiencies within our park system. And for those of you that were on the commission, gosh, it was several meetings ago, we went through a whole presentation on our findings and assessment of our current facilities. And then we also have a tool that we use called a park master plan. That is, for those of you that are not familiar with that tool, it's a specific planning exercise that focuses on a single park site and adopts, the long range plan that says, this is how this park will develop over time. So we have master plans at several park facilities. Luther Burbank, Aubrey Davis Park are the two most recent. We also have, and Paul West or Jason Kittner will jump in here if my memory's poor, master plans that are quite a bit older for Mercer Park, I believe, possibly Homestead as well. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention Pioneer Park, which has a number of plans that guide the steward and maintenance of those facilities and that really significant acreage that aren't called master plans, but they function in the same way. So all of this rolls up and informs our capital planning. So there's two documents now that you'll be looking at, and I probably should have put these in slightly different order. The first is the capital facilities plan. We've talked about this before. This is a 20-year project list. So it's everything, right? It's everything that's on our list right now that we can see out about 20 years. It also includes creating new facilities or new amenities, additions to existing facilities. It really helps us see out into the future, think about our long-term financial needs and the impacts as well. And depending on your impact fee formula, it may also inform the calculation of your impact fee which I'm not going to get into tonight. That would take us a whole meeting. So here's what I will tell you, especially for those of you that will be here 6 years from now when we do the next pros plan update. We had to do a pretty big lift getting the CFP created. We hadn't perhaps done a great job of maintaining the 20-year list over time, and that happens. So this was, us kind of regenerating a 20-year project list from all the various places that these projects were reflected, like in the Aubrey Davis master plan. So Commissioner Struck, Vice Chair Struck, you sent me an email. You asked a question. Can you include the dates that these projects were added to the list? And my answer is maybe, maybe. In some ways, this list is brand new. So I'm going to think about that and talk to the staff and see if we can't maybe even identify just when the project was originated or when it, we became aware of it. But I digress. So here's what I will tell you. If you're here 6 years from now, the development of the 20-year project list will not be quite as complicated as it was this time because we will have been maintaining it. The staff are all nodding, yes. Over time, as new master plans are adopted, as new projects emerge, we'll be adding them. As we complete projects, we'll be taking them off the list. So that's the 20-year project list. And that is where I'd actually like to focus tonight, is making sure that list, and I'm going to be hesitant to take anything off of the list, to be honest with you, because those projects were generated from some other document or need. But we are open to the commission adding potential projects to the list based on our public process and thoughts you have. That list feeds into the 6-year capital improvement plan, right? So now we're starting to get into the funding discussion, and we're saying, we're going to take our highest priorities and we're going to put them into a 6-year funding plan. That is, we'll look at that list tonight. I don't think we're going to have a lot of time, but when we get back to you in November, we'll really spend most of our meeting on that 6-year project list. So that's where we start aligning projects with funding. It's not always a balanced budget, meaning we don't always have the funding identified when the 6-year CIP is adopted, because we're using it to apply for grants and things like that. The first 2 years of your 6-year CIP is adopted into your city budget, right? So for the next 6-year CIP, 23-24, those projects, if approved by the council, will then become part of the budget, which means they're funded. This will all start to become more clear. I know you guys have been staring at a lot of spreadsheets lately. I've already mentioned grant applications, but that's really, really important. If we're going to be applying for grants, and you know this well because of the Luther Burbank Dock project, we have to show those projects in the 6-year CIP. That is what we need to say, this is a real project, we're applying for the grant. And it's been a quite effective tool for us lately. And also the 6-year CIP projects also contribute to informing your park impact fee rates. Next slide. Steve, do you want to take the considerations text?
Yeah, sure. So as staff and the project team think about capital planning and putting the list together, it's also important to make sure that that project list is costed out to not only include the cost of the actual improvement or amenity, but also make sure that we are trying to capture reasonable costs for things we call soft costs. And those include the planning, the permitting, the design and engineering, the project management, whether that's staff or outsourced, but also inflation. So we can craft a set of costs for any given project based on today. And then we have to escalate those depending on how far into the future we anticipate a project starting or being initiated. So we try to capture the full cost or close to the full cost as we can really know in the project list. So we're not caught off guard when we get to a CIP or a budget that potentially undervalues the real cost of a project. We just want to make sure that we're putting as much thought into the numbers on the front end as possible so it carries forward into out years. It's also important to note that, you know, we've had a fair amount of conversation over the last many months of docks and piers and deferred maintenance and replacements of things like playgrounds. As maintenance or repair replacement type projects get pushed down the road, or the can gets kicked down the road, so to speak, those repair costs or replacement costs will just grow in time. It's not that you're deferring $1 million project today for $1 million project tomorrow. You're deferring $1 million project today for a much more expensive project tomorrow. So acknowledging where the city is with regard to its deferred maintenance or its needs for repair replacement of existing infrastructure, again, helps inform relative priority or importance. And again, that shows through in the project priority ranking we've discussed in the past. And the last piece is with regard to structures or amenities that are close to failing. If the decision is to decommission them, or whether that's a forced decision, meaning a pier has an issue that needs to have it removed, or it's something that is intentional, that, okay, we're letting this go. In the event that that amenity needs to be reinstalled, it will come at a much higher cost due to permitting uncertainty and just higher cost in the future. So those are just some of the things that we also try to factor into all of the spreadsheet stuff that we do on the back end. And I'll ask Jesse if you want to run through an example or two.
Sure. So some do's and don'ts as you think about adding projects to your list. I am familiar with one project that is possibly going to be suggested tonight. And if there are others, and I have quite a few staff with me tonight too, we don't want to add a project to the list that isn't compatible with an existing master plan. So let me use a silly example. If you were to propose putting a baseball field in Pioneer Park, adding that to the list, we would tell you not to do that because that's not an allowable use at Pioneer Park. So we want to avoid things like that. And again, the staff will help you kind of guide you on that. Another example, if you'd like to add a project and we don't have a location for it, that's okay. I'm going to pick an example out of the air here. We've heard some interest in potentially a spray park or a splash pad. They're known by both names. If you'd like to add a project to the list, but we don't know the location yet, we would add that to the 20-year list and just note, we're not sure where this would be located. If it moves to the 6-year CIP, then we just have to make sure that one little step that's pretty important gets done first, which is engaging the community and exploring potential siting of those facilities. Something else we can talk about is if you see a project on the list and you think there should be something added to it, that's certainly possible. We'll just be looking for majority consensus tonight. So Chair McCarthy, we didn't talk about this ahead of the meeting, but I do want to make sure we have, for any changes or modifications we make to the list, I want to make sure we have majority support from the commission. Did I miss anything, Steve, in the do's and don'ts? And I think that's our last slide, so we can.
Yep, I'll stop sharing and now you can.
All right. So let me share my screen just quickly. And I think I'll go in and out of, whoops, you can't see that yet. I think I'll go in and out of share mode. You can all see the spreadsheet, big spreadsheet. Okay, so I currently have this spreadsheet sorted by project number. The project numbers, there's no rhyme or reason, just as projects are added, they're numbered, so there's not a mysterious meaning. If a project was added to the draft CIP, I've noted it in this column. The project type was just something that we used to attempt to be able to sort comparable projects so that we could evaluate the scores. We've included the location, either the name of the park, or in this case, it's 77th Avenue Landing. the park title and the project description, the project title and the project description. And then in this column, you have a revised cost estimate. And what 2020 means is that's in 2021 dollars. So as we continue our work on the park CIP, we do have to inflate some of these out based on the year the project is proposed. Now, this is the ratings that we developed with your input over several months. And I'm just going to caution you, I don't think it's a good use of our time to go through these ratings. This is just one tool, but it gives you a general idea of how these projects scored. Now, what's interesting, and I think I told you this was going to happen. Let's scroll up here to find one that's red. Okay, Aubrey Davis Park tennis court resurfacing. So it's scoring red partly because the tennis court surface is cracked, it's in disrepair, it needs to be repaired. But interestingly, tennis courts didn't score high in our survey. Pickleball certainly showed up. And so these are things we need to take into consideration. Now, you know, and I'll stop talking here and turn the discussion back to you. So decommissioning the courts, that may not be the best option either. So I just want to point out that this is just this rating, it's one tool. I think we have to take all of the input we've received and apply it to prioritizing this project list into the CIP. So again, tonight, I'm not planning to go over the ratings. I do, you know, here's some examples where you've got this kind of glaring red color. This is Clark Beach, not surprising. You know, the staff, what we want to do, we want to make sure your questions about the projects on this list are answered. We want to work through a process to allow you to add projects to this list if that's the desire. And then as time allows, we'll touch on the 6-year CIP before we end our meeting. So I don't know if it's helpful to keep sharing my screen, or if you all have this document in front of you, I will look to you, Chair McCarthy, to let me know how you'd like to proceed.
Yeah, I don't know. I find it easiest to look at them by project name rather than by project number, because it makes more sense to me to have all of the Aubrey Davis, for example, put together. I don't know how everybody else feels about that. And I just want to make note that Vice Chair Struck has had his hand up patiently to comment.
Yes, thank you. So Jesse, just kind of at the high level, so we've got, call it the 20-year plan and the 6-year plan. And so the way, you know, from your instructions, so the 20-year plan, let's not delete anything. And if you have ideas, let's add them. I got that. So the question is kind of moving from the 20-year to the 6-year plan. I assume that most of the projects on the 6-year plan theoretically should have started on the 20-year plan, and then as you know, things got funded and so forth, and it's probably not a perfect match, things come up and so forth. But if that's true, then from the commission's perspective, when we get to the 6-year plan, do we kind of have that same ability to say, well, I think you know, project, you know, number 1 really shouldn't be on the 6-year plan, it should stay on the 20-year and go back and forth like that? Or is it just like, no, we're not really going to have any kind of oversight on the 6-year plan? I'm just, again, trying to understand rules of engagement here.
Actually, the meat and potatoes of your work will be on the 6-year CIP. So that is the opportunity where we want your feedback on what stays, what goes, what shifts. We went ahead and put together a starting point for the 6-year CIP. I've been doing this a long time, and I just find it's easier to have a starting place. Some of that 6-year CIP was already baked, right? Because we picked up a previous CIP and rolled it forward. There's not an easy way to show you in an Excel spreadsheet the track changes, but when we get to that document, the staff will join me and we'll talk about, you know, the projects and why they're there. But that was really just our first crack at it. And what we did is, obviously we know without even looking at this data where we have on the 20-year list where we have projects that need our attention right away, things that are failing at the end of their life. So those move forward. But we also took the feedback we heard through this process, right? Because you've got really strong desire for trail connections and certainly open space management and maintenance. And we've got this land acquisition theme out there too. So we brought some of those potential projects forward as well. And that's important to note because trail projects on our scoring sheet don't actually score well because they're, in most cases, they don't have a huge safety. So when we get there, I'll talk about, what went into our thinking, and then we'll look to you. And again, that CIP conversation is probably going to be the bulk of our November meeting, but I wanted you to see the document so you can start thinking about it.
Okay. And if I may, on the scoring, I actually, I had a lot of comments, but I'm not going to go there, and I appreciate that, except for one. So one of the projects on it is the for the community center, having a new emergency generator, and that is scored as a unique feature. Now, I don't think that's a unique feature. I think that if somebody was to say, well, what kind of unique features do you have on Mercer Island? And I'd say, oh, well, we have an emergency generator. I just don't think that resonates. So I would change that one score. But other than that, I'll let it go. Thank you.
That's fair.
Thank you. Don Cohen.
Don Cohen. Jesse, I just want to understand, I want to be sure that I understand what you're looking for primarily from us. So are you looking, for example, whether we think there ought to be something specific added, like, here's just my list as you were talking and other people were talking. I just wrote this down. This isn't my list, but just looking at some of the responses. The rain garden one that Meg Lippert spoke to, spray park, food concessions. Maybe some of these are in there somewhere. A hotel, mountain biking area, rock climbing, golf course, disc golf, more off-leash areas for dogs, replacing the Island Park Bridge, having a fenced playground so that somebody with more than one child can rest easier, having boat rentals. Maybe that one's in there. Is that what you're looking for, those kinds of things?
And we're looking for specific projects for the built environment. So let's take boat rentals, for example. There's a project that needs to be added to support rental of boats, then that would potentially go on this list. Or we would just point to a Luther Burbank project that is, it's the boiler building, phase 2 of the boiler building, right? Getting, if having, because we saw that, when we asked for the breakdown of, well, so you want to do waterfront activities, what do you want to do? We know people want to do boat rentals. Well, then that should tell us, perhaps we consider funding phase 2 of the boiler building renovation, because that's what that facility was intended to do. So what I can help with tonight is if you have, and I will have to call on the staff to assist. If you think we need more pickleball courts, I can tell you where they're plugged into the spreadsheet already, and you can decide if you'd like to propose adding a project. I want to make sure when you look at the project list that if you have questions about the projects, that we get those answered tonight. This is a lot. I mean, just for us, and we do this is our paid job. Managing this 20-year list is quite a beast. So we want to make sure we get your questions answered. We get consensus to add projects.
Okay, so looking at this and building on that. So I know, like, for example, Clark, the dock at Clark is ending, Clark Beach is ending its life. So to me, that would seem like something that we should have as a priority for our 6-year plan. And I believe that it is in this list that we have. Are there any other projects like that that we should be looking at that are end of life and as Steve said, decommissioning them would make them cost so much more in the future, or possibly not, not be allowed to have that same replacement because of the way that the changes have happened, especially for Waterfront in terms of restrictions. So are there any other things besides Clark and Groveland that
Chair McCarthy, if I can comment on that, thank you for raising it. We did add a project to the 20-year list that was not on there previously after kind of considering all of our options. The truth is, we know that we have failing infrastructure at Clark and Groveland, but we don't have a master plan for either facility. Makes our job really difficult. So what you can see on my screen here, hopefully you can see it, is a proposed joint master plan for Groveland and Clark. And when we get to the CIP, you'll see that, yes, Commissioner or Chair McCarthy, excuse me, we did plug it into the CIP because the infrastructure is failing. So if you scroll across here, this is a master plan. So planning documents, if they're tied to capital, should be on this list, and they can be funded through our capital resources. And we estimate about $200,000 to complete that planning process. So that is that project. Are there questions on other projects that I can answer? Make sure that you know where they are on this list.
Rory desperately has his hand up, so we'll go with him because he hasn't asked a question in a while.
Well, I do have a specific question, Jesse, and that is that this group spent some time working on a scope of work for safety improvements to the Aubrey Davis Trail to try to eliminate some of the conflicts of interest in the area around the restroom. I don't know, I know the planning part of that was going to be covered under a grant, I believe, but to the extent that there are structural additions, are those assumed to be funded in the 21 or 22 budget, or do they need to show up on one of these lists?
See, that's a great question. One of the things I should have said, and I apologize, this might have been helpful, is this list is 2023 forward. So if a project is funded in 122, it's not showing here unless I've overlooked it. Paul or Jason, did either one of you want to comment on the project that Commissioner Westberg is asking about? It's the Luther.
I can do that. West CIP project manager. The Aubrey Davis Trail Safety Improvements Project is going to start its design work here shortly as soon as we get the consultant under contract. And that design work will take place through 2022, and construction will happen in the first half of 2023. So it'll seep over into 2023, but it's pretty much done by the summer of 2023.
So Commissioner Westberg, you mentioned additional facilities potentially. If you had something specific in mind, we can field that question, and Paul can let you know whether or not that was included in the scope.
No, I didn't have anything specific in mind. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't overlooking the fact that there would be a capital component to that, and making sure that it was covered, that capital component was covered somewhere, either in the present budget or that we got it on this list.
I will say that we haven't designed the project yet. There may be more improvements identified than there is capital resources in the grant from Department of Commerce for. So there may be a phase 2 that does need capital funding. So maybe it should go on a list somewhere as a phase 2. We just don't know if there is a phase 2 yet because we haven't done the design.
Okay, but that wouldn't require us. I mean, that's just something that could be done at a staff level or whatever. Just add the project on as needed to ensure its completion.
Yeah, I would recommend on that project, and it might be different for others, that we go ahead and proceed with design. And if there's an additional capital resource needed, or a phase 2, we would address that at that time through, it can be done in a variety of ways.
Great. Commissioner Cohen.
Don Cohen. Again, I'm sorry to belabor this, but I need to be sure that we've taken into account the comments that were made one way or another. So for example, let me go through these, and I may just be missing some of these. There were a lot of comments on Spray Park. I don't know how many people that was from. What would happen, is that in the 20-year plan anywhere? And if it isn't, how would that ever be accomplished if that was something that somebody wanted to? And I'm going to ask you the same question about, let's see, about rock climbing, about disc golf, about replacing the Island Crest Park Bridge, about a fenced playground. I do see that lighting along Island Crest Way is in here. So that was another one that I had mentioned earlier. So that's what I'm not saying I'm advocating for those things, but I just want to be confident that that I'm considering those.
Sure. That's why we're here tonight, actually, is for you to all bring forward the projects that you feel should be added to this list. We have not added any projects from public comment. The projects that you see here are the ones that we are familiar with and are aware of. So like a spray park is not on this list. If a majority of the Parks and Rec Commission feel that a spray park should be considered, then the first step is for somebody, and we can do this by consensus or motion. I'm not sure if your commission has a preference. Ultimately, you will be voting at your December or January meeting on your final handoff to the council. So a consensus process is fine. But Commissioner Cohen, if you're interested in adding a spray park to the list, then someone needs to bring it forward and we need to do a thumbs up exercise to add it or not.
Well, with all due respect, staff is much more familiar than we are with what's in the 20-year and 6-year one.
Sure.
So
Sure.
why is it impossible for staff who has reviewed all this stuff, and Steve to say, there was a lot of support for spray park, you ought to consider that. There was a lot of support for such and such that you ought to consider adding it, because I'm sort of feeling, no offense, I'm sort of feeling we got this 61 pages. I'm not saying we didn't have enough time to look at it, but it's a lot of material and I'm not sure what's in there and what's not. You just answered that question, that many of the things that were commented on in public comment or survey responses are not in here. And it seems to me staff ought to engage in that process also, and then help us narrow down those ideas to something reasonable and useful.
Sure. It probably wasn't fair for me to say that the items that came up in public process aren't in here, because certainly you have a very representative sample of anything from open space projects to trails to athletic fields and more. Any of the new amenities, though requested, we did not add in anticipation of this conversation. So I apologize if this is causing stress or confusion for the commission. That wasn't my intent. I think I will call on my colleagues then that are here this evening to assist me. I will say the one project that we heard about a lot that I would encourage you to consider whether or not to add to this list would be a spray park. I used it in the example earlier. The challenge will be that we don't have a location for it, but that shouldn't stop you from adding it to the list, because we could do an exercise later, a public process at a future date to help cite that. Other than that, the other comments we picked up, and again, I'll look to my colleagues, requests for golf course and things like that. I'm not seeing the fit. Other amenities, the lower hanging fruit, like fences around playgrounds, those can be incorporated into existing projects. But if you feel that that's needed somewhere specifically, we can certainly add it.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. I do want to just, Chair McCarthy, I just want to ask Merrill or Jason, some of you, Steve, Jean, that are here. If you have any, other project takeaways from the public process to Commissioner Cohen's question that we should be considering tonight.
I can go first. I think City Manager Baum, you summarized the sentiment that we've heard into the public comment, and prior to the pros plan process, there's been some discussion around splash pads, spray parks. That's probably the one of many that we've heard the most from. I think the other piece to this whole discussion is the projects. We have a built out park system for the most part. And so the projects we do have on this prioritization list are the monies that are in play and beloved by this community. And so I think it's representative of what we heard through public comment is what we have on this list and prior to this. And I think the rating scale in which you see associated to it is accurate, and it's, it needs to be prioritized as such. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Again, I would go back to some of what we heard from the public through the surveys and the public meetings. And again, as Jesse noted, a lot of those sorts of comments are reflected in the current list that address waterfront infrastructure, improvements to play areas, et cetera. But looking forward into, needs that aren't provided or might be needed more of going forward. We have talked about pickleball. So converting one court that is needing resurfacing is probably inadequate to serve the needs of picklers on the island. And, again, as a side note, you'll see some more information as we develop more depth of the chapters of the pros plan. But there are 19 tennis courts in the public realm on the island today, and there's additional private courts on top of that. So there could be opportunity to convert additional or provide some dedicated pickleball courts, which could also trigger the interest for having a few more picnic areas or shelters associated with that. Because if you're not familiar, pickleball is a fast moving and very social sport. So people often hang around waiting to jump in and join with other teams, and having a place to congregate, having a place that's convenient to access is a plus for pickleball court layout. And again, in addition, there are some gaps in where parks are located or who has reasonable access to waterfront sites. So the notion of future acquisitions is one we should also put some thought to. I'll pause there if Merrill or Jean or Elaine want to jump in.
Something else I'll mention, as Jason indicated, you do have a built-out park system, and that's something that as staff we take into consideration. That's probably why we're not coming forth with a whole long list of new amenities. In addition to that, you also have a very, very long and costly 20-year project list and a number of projects that are really critical to fund in some form or fashion in the next 6-year period. You guys know this, your shorelines, your docks, all aging at about the same pace. So in terms of why the staff aren't bringing lots of new bells and whistles to the table at this point, it's also just a reality check in terms of where we are right now with our park system and the overwhelming need. Any other staff have any takeaways from the process, amenities that I may have missed, something to consider? Meryl, I see you.
I was just gonna say we've been, trying to be very consistent with the community that Parks Commission is the place to give their feedback and to speak out and to share their experiences with you. So it is kind of a place that staff is hoping to learn, and we want to reinforce that message. We want you guys to, we want you to hear from your community too. So I think that's another reason we're interested in this discussion tonight.
Chair McCarthy, your cat has returned.
Yeah, I know she's been up and down this whole time. Okay, so now with those guidelines, let's go to Vice Chair Struck and see what he has to say.
Yes, thank you, Peter Struck. So kind of two comments. So first, just to kind of tag on to what Jason and Steve and others were saying. Yeah, I think this is a real learning process going on here, because I would be very uncomfortable. Let's say take this the spray park idea of just saying, well, let's put a spray park in, you know, because if you told me, well, it's going to be located, you know, in location X, I might say, no, that doesn't make any sense. If it's maybe Y, okay. And if I look at all the current projects on the 20-year plan, they're all very location specific. Almost all of them are. So I think that just to kind of say we're going to have this laundry list of things to, you know, nice to have or whatever, I think it's problematic. And I'll just leave it at that. And I guess I'm almost coming to the conclusion that maybe this is the first time through this. I don't know if we'll have another chance, or we'd say, you know, we'll ask, you know, we'll go through it and we'll learn a lot, and you know, we'll be back again in a year from now to kind of update this stuff in some respects. But having said that, so I do have a new project that I want to put forward to the commission. It was something that Meg Limbert in her public appearance talked about, and I had sent a paper, a description into Jesse and staff, I know, a couple of weeks ago and so forth, and that is to essentially to consider reclaiming about half of the paved surface that's by the recycling center to expand the native garden. And the reason we're proposing that is several reasons, but I just want to highlight a couple. One is, in looking at all these, and there's like 90 projects between the 20-year and the 6-year, and every project, none of them, to best of my assessment, reclaims any kind of impervious surface. Many of them don't have any change, but many of them add impervious surface. And I think that's becoming a hot button in the community. So I think this project would be actually reclaiming and taking away asphalt and, you know, reclaiming it into the native garden, which I think is a unique feature here on the island. Also, I think it repurposes what is probably an underutilized area of that park at this point, and it's also a sensitive wetland area. So I think you're accomplishing several things by doing that. Now, I will note, and I'm sure if I didn't note it, I'm sure somebody on staff would bring it up, that in 2022, there is a project to do at least kick off a master plan for Mercerdale. And this, I suspect, would be kind of subsumed by that. But I think it's important at this point to kind of put it on as a separate project, and at the appropriate time, it can be then folded into the overall Mercerdale master plan, if that makes sense.
Commissioner Carthy, may I respond really quick?
Yes, you can.
All right, so this is great. Thank you, Vice Chair Struck. So we have your fellow commissioners introduced a project. What I would recommend is that you go ahead and talk about that project. And before you do, everyone can see I've got the right screen showing the spreadsheet. Yes. Yes, Vice Chair Struck, you studied this well. We do have a master plan. It is in our current CIP, and so it will move ahead now, subject to council approval for Mercerdale Park. And so as you think about adding a project at Mercerdale, which you're certainly welcome to do, we just recommend that you sequence it after the master plan. Partly because we don't want to do any construction. And I'm sorry, I skipped a critical a critical piece. We anticipate in the near term that there will be a sewer line replacement project. The sewer line runs pretty much dead center through the middle of Mercerdale Park. So as we're working on these projects from the staff perspective is the fact that we're going to be digging up the middle of Mercerdale to replace a sewer line is really an important opportunity. That would be a good time to go in and do park improvements. So what we want to try to do is get just a step ahead of the sewer project, do the master plan, understand what improvements we might also make at this facility. And while the park is closed, because it will likely be closed for a period of time, we would try to work efficiently to do the improvement projects all at once. So I have no concerns about adding the project. I would just say we would want to make a note in the description that the master planning process should occur first and in the right sequence. And so that's what's on my screen right now. I will stop there and allow you to discuss that project. And again, Commissioner McCarthy, I would be looking for a consensus, majority consensus to add that project to the list.
Okay, so before we go any farther with other comments, does anybody have any additional comments about the native plant garden? And we'll discuss that. So, okay, Commissioner Westberg is nodding his head that he wants to talk about that. So I'm going to give him the floor.
And I agree fully with what Jesse said, that if we opt to go forward with this project, that it should be incorporated into or it should follow in the master planning effort to make sure you get a comprehensive approach. I'm just wondering, since there is potentially other impervious surface in various parks, such as the large concrete pad in Luther Burbank Park outside of the old stables, is that the area across from the dog park, is expanding. If we're going to put a project in addressing removal of surplus impervious surface, we state it more broadly to address other areas that could potentially benefit from that and add more pervious surface to the parks in general.
Yeah, that sounds like it would make sense. I'm sure that beyond that Luther Burbank piece of cement, there's a couple of other places that have just old pieces that could probably be looked at. Elizabeth, you have your hand up.
Yes. So this is not in regards to the current project that we're talking about, but I would like to put forth just towards the group that I think one of the big things that the Arts Council is interested in seeing happen is a dedicated arts performance space. I don't have a location of where that would be, but I think that would be a great thing to have on the 20-year plan.
And Elizabeth, if I could clarify, are you suggesting an indoor facility? Because the amphitheater at Luther Burbank Park, the replacement and what I think would be a probably modest enhancement is on the list, and that's an outdoor venue?
Yeah, no, I mean, I was in this instance, because we are obviously talking about the Parks Department, was talking about an outdoor space. And while I know that we're looking at modifying the amphitheater, I don't know that that's a broad enough thing to accommodate all types of arts performance. So I think it's a great thing for like Seattle Shakespeare and plays, but a bigger picture that could accommodate music and dance and the like.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner or Chair McCarthy, I apologize. I would just recommend that we take one project at a time so that there's consensus to add it or not.
Yeah.
To Commissioner Westberg's comment about combining the impervious surface decommissioning, I would suggest that you keep that separate from Vice Chair Struck's project, because I heard it was decommission asphalt and expand at Native Plant Garden. That's a slightly different project. And then, in fact, the decommissioning of the pad at Luther, I'd probably have to have Paul come on screen here. Well, we can talk about that in a minute, but I would suggest Vice Chair Struck's be a standalone project, and we'll take the others maybe one by one.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see if we have consensus about adding the expanding the native plant garden in Mercerdale, adding that as a project, and decommissioning some of the cement pad over by the recycling center in Mercerdale. Let's do like a thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways on everybody. Okay, I think,
Executing majority.
yep. Rory, what is,
Can I ask a question? Are we talking about adding to the 20-year list?
We're on the 20-year list, yes.
Okay. And I wasn't proposing the concrete pad as a separate project. I was only using that as an example of another
Absolutely.
area
Mhm.
that could be addressed in a broader project. So no, we don't
Thank
need to, we don't need to consider that as a separate project at this time. There's plenty of other stuff on that list.
Thank you, Commissioner Westberg, for that clarification.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Birkenwald has a comment.
So I just want to be clear, did the splash pad get added or not? I know you kept asking to add it. I would like to see that added. I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah,
I keep using it as an example, but I haven't added it until I have direction from a majority of you.
Okay.
I will say Vice Chair Struck's comment about not having a site is valid. You have an alternative, which would be to add something like it's a planning project to evaluate potential location for a, X square footage spray park. You could put that on instead of, or in addition to the spray park, because it really is, it would need a two-part process. Jason, are you in the background? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I am in the background. I don't have any drastic thoughts that are different than what you expressed here this evening. And I don't think I have anything else further to add at this point.
Jason, what do you think? I'm thinking out loud here. Maybe it is just one project, knowing that it will have two steps. Step one is a planning process and step two is construction. And again, this is just a project list. These aren't funded projects yet.
Yeah, to add to that point, I will say it's always advantageous to us to do the planning process first and then get a more concrete game plan together, realistic costs, construction costs and things like that. That's advantageous and helpful to us. So yes, the way you describe it would be helpful and in the long run.
but if we do, if we don't have it as a thing of interest, then how will you know to do the research to find out if it's feasible? So it's like the chicken and egg. So I think that we should put it on our list as a thing, an interest for the 20-year project list, and find a site, do that research. Okay, so does anybody have any more comments about the splash pad, or should we do a thing? Okay. Vice Chair Struck has a comment about the splash.
Yeah, I like the idea of the planning aspect of it, because, one thing I think about is, well, could you take one of the existing playground areas that is going to need to be renovated at some point in the maybe near future, not so near future, and just say, well, we're going to convert that to a spray park, and that way, you would just kind of be taking that kind of, call it the concept of playgrounds and just diversifying it by adding this, as opposed to kind of just replacing with more kind of the more standard playground equipment.
Mm-hmm. All right, Commissioner Westberg.
That's essentially what I was going to say. I agree with the idea of putting a project in for a planning effort that would try to nail down more of the details. And Sarah's had her hand up for a while, longer than me. So
yeah, Commissioner Markson, I'm.
Oh, the other Sarah.
Yeah.
the other Sarah.
Commissioner Markson, did you have comments about the splash pad? She has another comment. So right now we're talking about the splash pad. Commissioner Cohen has a comment about the splash pad.
I would support the planning effort relating to a splash pad.
Okay, so let's do a thumbs up, thumbs down about putting the splash pad on there to see if it's feasible. So
Can I just make one more quick comment?
Yes.
Okay, so real quickly, I remember reading recently in the news that there's a lot of bacteria that can grow in the splash pad. So you just want to be careful from, like, I think the planning is good because I know there's a lot of maintenance that the city would have to do to like make sure that it's not. So anyway, I just wanted to put that there.
Yeah, there's a lot of conditions on splash pads. I know they can only be X amount away from bathrooms, and there's different things like that that all have to go into it. So definitely, let's put it on the list for a proposal to look at the feasibility of having a splash pad on Mercer Island. So thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle. Okay. So Commissioner Markson is in the middle, but everybody else is thumbs up.
And Chair McCarthy, if I may, before we switch, just for any amenity that we're proposing or will be proposed as a planning effort, that would be the ongoing operational and maintenance costs and impact would be something that would be evaluated as part of that process and that planning effort. So
yeah, I think that's great.
Rest assured that we will take care of that as well.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, Commissioner Markson. You're on mute. Sorry, Sarah.
On double mute. I didn't see anything on the list related to, you had in the survey something about like how to raise money or how to, the best way to raise money. That's probably not exactly what it said, but the idea of expanding concessions, especially in areas where we're doing a lot of improvements, like maybe around the Luther Burbank boiler room or something like that. I don't know if that's, and it should be in a different spot, or if it would be its own line item, or if it's just included when it seems logical. But
So
if it should be added as its own line item, I would propose doing it.
Well, I'm going to ask my colleagues. So what's interesting about our park system is we do have concessions facilities at a number of our parks. They're fairly old. So if we wanted to truly operate them, they would likely need an amenity. Paul, can you prattle off where we have concessions amenities? And like at Luther Burbank, where we have facilities, if there are restrictions in the master plan, can you also reference that?
Sure. We have concession stands at South Mercer Playfield and Island Crest Park. And there's a unused concession stand at the Luther Burbank boiler building annex restroom building. It's not currently used. Jason, you might fill in any other concessions that I'm not remembering, but those are the three I can think of.
We have some Island Park. Is there anything at Island Crest?
Did I not say Island Crest Park? There is at Island Crest Park. Island Crest and South Mercer are the two ball field concessions.
Okay.
I know of. Luther Burbank Park, when the city acquired that from King County, there was actually a study done about having a restaurant at the boiler building. And the study looked at comparable facilities around Lake Washington and which were profitable and which weren't. It concluded that a restaurant at the boiler building would not be able to sustain itself because it doesn't have enough traffic that restaurants require to, turn a profit. It's too far out of the way for people who are not trying to go there to get to. And restaurants often need walk-by business in order to be able to survive. So, and then the master plan specifically does not exclude that possibility. It has language in it talking about low impact activities at the waterfront. So things like boat camps and boat rentals were considered low impact activities. But I think it alludes to the fact that it was extensively discussed during the master plan about having a restaurant there, and that was rejected.
Paul, does the master plan preclude what I would more traditionally think of as concessions, like during the summer, sodas and candy and other nutritious gems that our children love being sold there? Or
Master plan doesn't get specific about concessions there. It does say concessions, but by concession, I believe it means the rental concessions of the boats. Now, a concessionaire who operates out of there may want to offer, soft drinks or prepackaged snacks or something like that, but that would be an operational decision. I don't think it would be cornerstone of their business.
So Jason, I'm curious, of the other two concession areas that we have, are they kind of, updating, or is it just simply that we would want to pursue something operationally regarding contracting for use of those facilities? And then are there any other areas where we could put concessions that would be allowable per a master plan? Nothing's jumping out at me at the moment.
No, nothing that we have in other facilities. We could certainly look to add that amenity elsewhere down the road. You're up for concessions, you're looking for larger volume areas. That's why they're the ball fields, or at the ball fields. That's where they typically have tournaments and long weekends and things like that. So I will say the existing concession stands, the South Mercer Playfield concession stand was upgraded in 2010. But again, the types of things that are being sold there are prepackaged goods. We have pretty strict guidelines from Department of Health of what can and can't be done based off our existing kitchen. So if there was something that wanted to be done beyond that, then we would have to look at a facelift or an upgrade potentially for both of the Island Crest and South Mercer facilities. That's, I think right now it seems like the prepackaged food, the hot dogs, the things like that, but it's a different model than maybe what we're talking about here.
It seems to me that food trucks there's so many more food trucks now than there was 10 years ago, and it's so much more flexible to be able to get that, and you can get such a range of food from those trucks that might be a better solution than to try and look at concessions, especially down at South Mercer or at Island Crest, because they are used so infrequently. Ryan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. The only other facility I would say I've heard requests for some sort of concessions at would be the community center. Previously, there was at the old facility, my understanding was there was some sort of a cafe or something like that. I hear frequently previous to COVID, when we had people coming in and out, there was a lot of people with a desire for something similar to that at this facility. So just wanted to put that one out there. That kind of just popped into my head.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, so it is just about 7:30. I'm thinking that perhaps we should take a 10-minute break and then come back and continue discussing things, or unless people are like, yep, I like this list, there's nothing else that I want to discuss, we're going to go with what's on the paper already. So
what did we do with Peter's proposal? I don't.
Well, we thumbed up it. We gave it a thumbs up.
Oh, we did? I missed that.
Well, you gave a thumbs up.
Okay.
To that one. You did.
And
then
I'm not sure we thumbs up or thumbs down concessions, but what I might suggest, this may not manifest itself into a project, but it's something that we will definitely reflect as we're still working on action items in terms of operations, and look at opportunities for those types of services, if that's agreeable to the Parks Commission.
I would not favor that. This is Don Cohen. It just is not important to me, and it has too many problematic parts of it. But I can't stop you from taking a look at something from time to time. But it's not as high a priority as some of these other ones, with all deference to Sarah's comments.
Mm-hmm. Vice Chair Stark.
Yeah, I would echo Commissioner Cohen's thoughts that I don't think this one is a high priority, and I think Chair McCarthy, your suggestion of food trucks, is excellent. That if there's a baseball tournament or something like that, somebody can just drive in and provide that for a couple days or whatever, and it just I think it'd just be kind of a big headache for the city to get, actively involved in food service.
Yeah. All right, so we do not want to put concessions on our list at this time. Do we want to take a break? Do we have lots of things that we want to continue talking about? Why don't you give me a thumbs up, thumbs down about taking a break and then talking about more stuff? Or are we basically that we just have a couple more things that we want to talk about?
So Chair McCarthy, let me tell you where we are in tonight's meeting.
Yes.
I'll be looking for any final additions to the 20-year list. And then next, I was just going to preview the CIP document, walk you through it so you're familiar with what you're looking at. And that was really, and field any questions, and that was going to be it for the evening.
Okay, well, I'm going to call a 10-minute break then. Oh, sorry, Meryl, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to say, Elizabeth Mitchell, your Arts Council guest, had to leave, but she emailed me and she wanted me to bring up a performing arts space for discussion again. So
Okay.
whether that's before or after a break is up to you, but I wanted to put it out there.
All right, well, we'll bring that up because we didn't follow up on her suggestion. We kind of lost track. Okay, so it is now 7:32, so let's come back at 7:42 then from our break, and we can all stop our video and mute. Thank you. All right, it is now 7:43. And let's get back to looking at these lists.
Chair McCarthy, I think where we left off was considering our Arts Council representative had suggested a potential project addition of, I'm recalling possibly an outdoor performance space, possibly larger than the amphitheater that we have at Luther Burbank Park.
Sorry to interrupt, Jesse. Can you give us some more information about the amphitheater? How many people does it hold? And is the stage area, is that covered?
I need to call on one of my colleagues. I knew this was going to come up, Chair McCarthy. In fact, Meryl, did we end up getting some pictures down there? And oh, there you go.
We do have some photos, yeah, so they'll be probably included in your pros list. I could pull one up and share it if it's helpful.
Why don't we have Ryan talk about what's at the amphitheater now?
Okay.
It's fairly limited. This is Ryan again, sorry. It's fairly limited. There is electrical down there. The stage area is actually like a natural grass platform that's fairly limiting. The seating area is sort of tiered into the hillside there. I don't have an accurate number, but I guess probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600 people would be your max crammed into that location. There is no amplification of sound or anything, speakers or whatnot. It's sort of a bare bones facility with a backdrop, or the sort of the designated area has sort of a 3-paneled wood look to it that's in could use a little bit of love, I guess I would say. But that's sort of the facility layout that it has currently.
So something else I'll pitch really quick is we do host in non-pandemic times, particularly a number of events at Mercerdale Park. And given that we have a master plan on our list, I would opine that one of the areas we would look at is where the pergola is, where the band's set up, because if nothing else changes, one of the changes I would advocate for, I think the staff will nod their heads, is just more power. We're really limited in what we can do at that facility because of our electrical capacity, and possibly improve lighting, as the bare minimum. And then in the master planning process, you could consider, do you elevate a little bit the stage? You have other options. So that might be something that you would defer to a master plan as a discussion, as a potential as well. In terms of what you heard in the public process, we didn't hear a large outcry for performance facilities. However, we also didn't ask that very specific question. We did ask a question in the first survey about events, and there was pretty broad support for events.
Mm-hmm. All right, Commissioner Westberg.
There is, as another alternative, or to what Jesse said, or perhaps in addition to, there is an $800,000 project on the list to renovate the outdoor amphitheater area, and that could be expanded to address other possible uses of that space for other performing arts presentations. So there's the possibility of doing that as well, and that it can differently configured. It could accommodate a lot of people down there. I'm a little reluctant to start dedicating park spaces to specific uses, because we have a growing population but a limited amount of park space, and I think we need to stay nimble about how we use our land base to be able to accommodate lots of different needs. But since the amphitheater is already there in Luther Burbank Park, and we were looking to renovate it anyway, we could look at potentially expanding the use to address other needs.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. That's why I just wanted to get a handle on what was there right now, to see, what the limitations were and if it would be possible to add on. I know, so she was saying specifically for dance, possibly we could, something to look at would be like a floor that could be put down specifically for specific events and not left there all the time in the weather. For example, if you wanted to do specific performances that needed a special type of flooring. Okay, Vice Chair Struck.
Yes, thank you. Kind of to tag on to what Commissioner Westberg said. I mean, the current amphitheater clearly, yes, does need renovation, but, back in the day, they used to have rock bands there and, a lot of different things. I think that what I would suggest is that, the Arts Council, or individuals come back with a more defined proposal. We're kind of grasping at straws here a little bit as to what's really desired. So, for example, as Ryan suggested, right now, all the seating, you're primarily sitting on grass, or you're bringing like a lawn chair, kind of like they do it at Mercerdale. And so are they anticipating they'd really want to have more formal type seating arrangements? I think you'd find most people would be probably against that for the reasons that, we just have so limited space, in those areas and so forth. And it'd be kind of targeting it for a single use as opposed to, now it's a more multi-use. So I think we just need more information before we spend a lot of time discussing. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I may, we would be happy to, Ryan, Merrill, myself, or a combination thereof, reconnect with the Arts Council, particularly on the amphitheater project. This is a little premature, but we have a potential donation related to that project. It's not far enough along that I can say for sure it's going to happen. And then that project would also be eligible to be funded through the 1% for the arts. I won't get into that now, but there's potentially resources and grants. And I do think in its heyday, it was probably pretty amazing. It's a little sad right now. So it needs an infusion of resources and a renovation. So we can take that back and maybe get them more involved in that type of project. Meryl, I saw you pop on there. Do you have
I dropped a photo of the amphitheater into the chat box if folks can access that, just to give you a little context. It's a wedding photo. It looks lovely, and it doesn't always look so lovely out there, but it'll give you an idea of kind of what the space is like if it worked.
Meryl, I am not able to open that image. I'm not sure if others are.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. It is very nice.
Oh, I'm having an operator error. Ignore me.
Yeah. So it's so basically
Just to give an idea.
not covered. It's not a covered area. It's an open area. I think that it should be put on included in the Luther Burbank Amphitheater to look at possibly expanding the uses of that area to be able to have more different types of performances there. And that it's using an existing space, so it's not taking away from any other land uses, and it allows us to be flexible going forward with our park space.
I will say, Chair McCarthy and Paul, please run interference here. There are some limitations. I think the master plan at Luther Burbank Park will allow for us to renovate the facility. It might even allow, which is part of what I'm looking at right now with this donation, to cover it.
Mm-hmm.
But really expanding the use and increasing the impact on the park would probably not be compatible with the master plan. So we would, Paul, did the master plan say anything more about that? And we don't have to take time tonight. I just wanted to make sure that there may be some limitations.
The master plan basically has the amphitheater staying to some degree as it is, but it does call for replacement of the stage, allowing improvement of stage elements, including cover, performance infrastructure, and incorporation of an adjacent community fire pit. So, but the tone in the master plan is not, elaborate expansion of improvements.
Thank you.
But even having that and having, the stage be able to be covered, that gives flexibility in terms of being able to have more lighting there, and having, raised elements on the stage without impacting, especially, like I said before, if there's something where you have a floor that's just put there temporarily for certain performances, so it doesn't impact all the time. Should be something that we should be looking at.
Yeah, I will just echo again, I think addressing electrical and lighting as part of the amphitheater renovation will open up for just, different types of uses, and also considering electrical improvements at Mercerdale would also just allow us to have different types of performances there. So planting a seed for the future Mercerdale Park Master Plan.
Yeah, because I think about Marymore and how they have concerts there, where, they do put some chairs down, but then people just sit around the edges in their own lawn chairs. And those are always really fun. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing then.
So I will make a final call. Are there any other projects that you wanted to be considered to add to the list? And if not, I will walk you through the CIP real quick.
All right, I see Vice Chair Struck has his hand up.
Yeah, this is just more of a question. So Jesse, I know that the city just put out some information about kind of Snake Hill and kind of what the future, so the question is there gonna be a kind of a bike track, pump track, bike skill, I don't know what the right term is, project that's already being contemplated, or do we need to add that at this point? I'm not really sure where that fits in.
Jason just appeared. Elaine
appeared too. Commissioner Struck, the bike skills area is already represented as an amenity. The work that's being done is evaluating whether or not the bike skills area is still the right location, the right style, the right type of jumps. What's the future of that area? What's the future of the bike skills area? It's an existing amenity, so I would say there is, and it serves a group on the island that is probably not very well represented in the survey results. And so I think there's an interest from your staff to keep the bike skills area as an amenity in the park system. Whether or not that ends up being in Upper Luther Burbank Park, whether it ends up being somewhere else, I think that's still a TBD, and that'll be based off of the work that comes out of the consultant that's being taking place as we speak now. So Elaine, anything else to add to that?
Elaine Summergren, Deputy Director of Public Works. No, I think you captured it pretty well, Jason. I would just say, he spoke well of what the current consultant is doing out there, but that's really looking at the existing facility. If the commission was interested in exploring other options for different styles that could meet different needs in the biking community, as you said, a pump track or something like that, I think that would be a completely separate project. So that would probably need to be proposed as a standalone. So.
We do have a project on the sort of master list here because we anticipated at some point needing to do some renovation work in the bike skills area. It's PA 0167. This list preceded the decision to close and reevaluate. So it's there, but it's specific to the Luther Burbank facility. So to Elaine's point, if you wanted to consider additional amenities, biking amenities or pump track, those are not reflected on this list. And I will say we've kicked it around. I don't want to open a can of worms here, but a pump track, if you're familiar with that type of facility, is a more compact design. It's pretty popular where there are pump tracks. We got stuck on where we would put it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think where I'm coming from, and I'm kind of at a loss here of how to move forward, but you know, we've got a kind of an existing facility at Snake Hill that's obviously shut down, and you know, where you know, I guess, you know, it might still be there in 6 months or going forward, it might not be. But I guess I'm trying to think about, you know, is there a project that kind of represents the bike community so that says, well, if it gets shut down, you know, at least there's kind of a placeholder to say, oh, well, we could, you know, go look at, maybe it's a different type, a different location, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, Vice Chair Struck, I would say we share the concern, because just eliminating the facility doesn't really make sense, and it certainly doesn't serve the group of users that are, you know, really love that facility. A couple things. This isn't, you know, if something changes 6 months from now after you adopt the pros plan, we have other mechanisms to go back. The council may redirect us to do a study on where we would relocate a facility. So we have other paths. Alternatively, if you'd like to add a project here, I'm trying to think what it would be. Would it be studying the location of potential, you know, bike facilities? Or we can think about it too if we're getting too late in the night. And
yeah, that's kind of where I'm landing. Is I'm, you know, I guess we could kind of, like you say, kind of go the planning route, but I think I'm happy if we want to just kind of put a pin in it for tonight and think about it.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that we want the bike community to know that we are recognizing their need and are thinking about what would be the best thing to do for that part of our community. Okay, Commissioner Cohen.
Don Cohen, on the bike thing, I don't even know what a pump track is, and I think we ought to let the city process play out the way that the city manager has already and Jason have already implemented, of having this study done and recommendations made concerning the existing thing before we start spending a lot of time and effort on alternatives. On the Luther Burbank amphitheater thing, I don't know where we wound up on that. Do we wind up just sort of leaving the reference that the city manager mentioned in there without adding anything? Because you don't want to get into the whole issue of parking if you expand the use of it, and then we'll have a miniature Micah dilemma on our hands. So in any event, I'm okay with those, with that, not adding on that one, and I would not at the moment favor adding on something about a new pump track or whatever it is.
that's wonderful. So what I heard is Ryan is going to take Commissioner Cohen out riding on a pump track, so he can report back on that experience. And
hey, I walked by the amphitheater just yesterday.
Yes, the asterisk on your amphitheater comment is we did leave it, but we will go back and talk to the Arts Council, because I think there's opportunities to move that project forward with, you know, creative funding, and we should get them involved in that.
Okay, so then I think we're ready to go on to the 6-year project list.
Wonderful. Give me just.
Oh, sorry, Marie has her hand up.
So, I mean, I have to say, I'm a little alarmed from the perspective of the Open Space Trust Conservancy, that in the 20-year plan, the Pioneer Park, well, first of all, the trust board hasn't had a discussion of any of these objectives. And what I notice is, like, land acquisition has been proposed to be removed from the 20-year plan. And I'm not sure how the trust board would feel at all about the suggestion that we add lighting to the park to provide for bike trails. So I'm going to request that the Pioneer Park portion of this be sort of set aside and discussed at the next trust board meeting, so that we can get a full input from the board about how they feel about the proposals on the 20-year list and what the trust board might consider as being more or less important.
Sure. And let me clarify, the lighting is not, I don't know, Paul, if you're still here, I got too many screens open. The lighting project is not in Pioneer Park, and it's been on the list for quite a while. Paul, are you there?
Yeah, the lighting trail, the lighting project, it was a community request to the trust board 10 or more years ago, and the trust board actually approved it in maybe 2011, 2012 as a project. And it's just been on the capital list, pretty much unfunded, waiting for community funding, non-city community funding to make a move forward. It's the asphalt trail along the east side of Island Crest Way, would have bollard lighting at a low level to provide wayfinding for people using that in the dark. And the reason is that there's no sidewalk on either side of Island Crest Way in that stretch between 68th and 63rd. And people using that trail at night have a very difficult time finding their way. The bollard lighting would allow them to, see where the trail is going. It's not cast down lighting like from the street lamp. It's wayfinding lighting.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. Marie, if I could ask just one favor, I'd like to show you the 6-year CIP because I think it will close the gap where some things are missing for you, because we have a whole bunch of ongoing funding plugged in to the 6-year plan. So may we go there, and then if you still have questions, we can come back to that.
Okay.
Okay, let's see if I can get the right screen up. Okay. So this, ignore this part of the spreadsheet over here. This is future revenue that I will endeavor to build out by the time I see you in November. What I wanted to do before we say farewell tonight is just walk you through the 6-year plan so that you understand what it is you're looking at and how this is built. So as a reminder, and I can't remember who asked the question a moment ago, it may have been Vice Chair Struck. The Parks Commission, now that you're formed, you will look at this CIP list every 2 years, and you will look at it as part of the mid-biennial budget process. So the council will ask you to provide a recommendation to them on the 6-year CIP. So every 2 years, we'll be looking at this and adjusting it. You won't be spending as much time on that master list. That's something the staff will try to keep up, but you will be doing a lot of work on this. So the spreadsheet is broken down. It has kind of 4 general categories. And remember, CIP is capital improvement plan, or sometimes people say capital improvement program. This first grouping of projects here, MICEC is the community center. These are all building projects. And I'm gonna make a quick change here to stop my video so I can move this. This next group of projects is, your parks, and I'm just scrolling here, your parks, recreation and open space projects. So pretty long list. Down here, we did have one stormwater project emerge. So that's funded completely outside of the parks budget. And then Aubrey Davis Park, we have some intersection work. So that most likely falls into transportation. Okay, so let's go back up and take a look at some examples. So here in the community center of the building budget, you're starting to notice where we have ongoing funding plugged in. And these are not, for the most part, they're not showing on your 20-year list because these are just ongoing things. If you'd like me to add them, I certainly can. So this item right here is building repairs for the community center. We traditionally set aside somewhere around $300,000 a year to maintain that facility. So you can see we're maintaining that funding and escalating it by about 3% over the 6-year period. So it's here because we know we need it to sustain operations. I will let you math talented folks know that the formula is a 3% escalator and rounding up to the nearest 1,000. These are planning level cost estimates. So the staff will tell you I get persnickety when I see things down to the single dollar. So there's a lot of rounding happening here. Okay, so that's ongoing projects. Now to Marie's comment, whoops. So there's a couple things that we're tinkering with right now. First one is a property acquisition placeholder. So in our previous planning documents, we called out specific acquisitions, and that is not a best practice. First of all, unless you have agreement from the owner you're purchasing from, it really shouldn't be showing up in a document. It also, I will just tell you, having been in the business for a long time, that it's not always advantageous to identify the property you want to buy and say, hi, I'm here from the government and we want to buy your property. The price almost always goes up. So what we're considering, and this is something for us to think about between now and your next meeting, is starting to plug in a meaningful number to build a property acquisition fund. So this would be, you know, through our various revenue sources, starting to grow a fund to buy property. Now I know what you're thinking, $500,000 a year isn't going to get us very far, but my thought here is you got to start somewhere. So that's what that item is. And I won't go through each one. I'm just going to go through a couple so you understand what you're looking at. The other thing that I did here is we know we have major projects that need to happen at Clark Beach and Groveland, but we don't know what they are yet, because we need to do a master plan process first. So knowing that those are on deck, in working with the staff, I roughly estimated that between those two park facilities, and by the way, I will mention some of these are still in 2021 dollars, so I need to escalate. Our current estimate is about $7 million in improvements needed at Clark and Groveland, mostly tied to beach and shoreline work. So what we did here for planning purposes is we plugged in a placeholder over a 4-year period. Now, this will be something, again, this is just me handing this to you, the staff hand off to the commission, that we should talk about at the next meeting. How are you feeling about that? We can tell you a little bit more about how those numbers were generated. Okay, let's go down to some other things. This, and Elaine, feel free, or Paul, to jump in here. We set aside ongoing resources for open space management. And so this has been part of our budget for a long time. So here again, you see that, you know, it's about 300,000 and we're escalating it over the 6-year period. We also set aside, well, let's just keep going with these ongoing, recurring parks minor capital. So these are projects that are, you know, they're not big enough to make a standalone capital project, but these are, you know, kind of major repairs, if you will. So it's interesting, Commissioner Westberg talked about decommissioning a concrete pad that I'm at Luther Burbank. It's escaping me right now. That project, although disposal costs would be quite high, I'm sure, could actually be a minor capital project. So keep that in mind. The smaller maintenance stuff, you know, when we have to go fix a restroom or replace a piece of playground equipment, it's likely coming out of there. Trail renovation is also an ongoing set aside. We've got 55,000 there. So that's, think about your trail system, right? This is, you know, minor renovation projects that we're doing over the course of the year. Again, we've got it in there and escalating. Let me scroll down here. Aubrey Davis Park vegetation management. So by the way, those items I was just talking about, you'll notice they're all designated as multiple locations, meaning that means system-wide, park system-wide. Okay, so jumping down to Aubrey Davis Park, you see ongoing project for vegetation management. Again, we're plugging in resources annually. One of the outcomes of the Aubrey Davis Park Master Plan was simply that we had a lot of languishing vegetation and maintenance, management, replacement needed to be prioritized. So that's what that represents. Let's keep going. Now we get down here to Pioneer Park. Again, we traditionally put in ongoing capital dollars for Pioneer Park and Engstrom. And what I will tell you about Pioneer Park, and Marie and even Rory, who used to serve on the trust, others will mention, is that that space is stewarded by the Open Space Conservancy Trust, but the funds are here in the park CIP. So same thing, we've carried forward our funding levels, and you can see that we're escalating out through the 6 years. Okay, so something else, I'll just, some nuances, things that I know because I've stared at this spreadsheet a lot. We want to be efficient and combine projects where we can. And so that was something the staff and I have been doing over the last 3 months. So let me give you an example. Island Crest Park, North Infield Turf and Backstop Replacement. That is a project that needs to happen soon. We also have a Southfield Backstop Replacement project. There is incredible efficiency with bidding those projects together. But wait, there's more. South Mercer playfields. You'll note the same year, we have a turf replacement and a ball field backstop upgrade. This is becoming a pretty massive project, but I will tell you there will be cost savings by combining these, doing them in the same year and bidding them all together. And so given where we are in the world of things with your capital projects need, we really endeavored to look for those opportunities. Let's see if there's, I will just mention this Ellis Pond. It's a small project. Jason Kittner pointed out it can be funded 100% through stormwater. So that's why it's sitting there, just so we don't forget about it. Aubrey Davis Park, and Jason and Paul may decide to move these back to the parks bucket, but many of these are actual, it's intersection work in the roadway or near the roadway crossings. Some are trail crossings. So right now they're sitting in the transportation list. So the next thing I just want to point out, and I promise you I will stop talking here in a moment, is how we have projects, phased. So let's take one that's a little more interesting here. Well, here we go. Okay, here's a project we added. We added to the CIP because this is Aubrey Davis Park, the Lid B restroom. So in the Aubrey Davis Park master plan, we identified a need for another restroom on Lid B, which is right off of West Mercer Way, where you have the big playground and right across the street from the soccer field. So when we're laying out projects like this, I'll just remind you, this is a relatively simple project, but it will still probably take 2 years, because in your first year, in this case, 2026, we're doing design and we're getting our bid documents ready. And by the time we hit 2027, usually in the first quarter of a year, we're out to bid. So that's why they're split across 2 years. Your more complicated projects may be split across 3 years. What else can I tell you about this list? So grand total, actually all the way at the bottom, is $40 million of projects that we dropped on a 6-year list. And if any of you are wondering if we discovered a money tree, we did not. We did not discover a money tree. This is quite a bit higher than your last park 6-year CIP, but that's something we'll be working on over your next 2 meetings. Is we are recommending, going forward with a project list that looks like this, because a lot of these projects will be eligible for grants. And, perhaps there's other sources of funding as well, like a potential ballot measure. So remember this placeholder right here, the beaches and shorelines placeholder, just like the Luther Burbank docks, I think there will be opportunities for grant funding. So tonight, I wasn't planning to talk about how the projects are laid out. I just wanted to make sure you got comfortable with this document and what you were looking at. These numbers reference what's on the 20-year list, and I would be happy, I'll turn my camera back on now that I can adjust myself here. Stop showing my other screen. If you have questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes, Don Cohen. This isn't a specific question about those comments, but I'd like to voice my support for Marie's comment regarding the Open Space Conservancy Trust. I served on that also for 8 years, and I'm sure Marie knows that there was, before that time, there was discussion about the issue of lighting along Island Crestway, even though that's not literally in Pioneer Park, but the potential impacts on invertebrate species and other, invertebrates, et cetera, et cetera. But from a process point of view, I'm a little disappointed that the Conservancy Trust has not been involved yet in this, and I applaud getting them involved because and Rory probably had this also, and he was on it. It never pleased me much to see things that proceeded because of time constraints without weighing the opportunity to weigh in. But again, I'm not criticizing anybody for it, but I support whatever it takes to engage with the trust after the city manager reviews the materials that she mentioned to Marie.
Sure, I appreciate that feedback, and I'll talk to Elaine and Marie, you as well, about when we might schedule a special meeting with the trust. I don't know that we can wait until November, honestly, to have you review these materials, so we can take that offline. But now that it's all ready, the CIP is at least in draft, I'd be happy to connect with all of you and talk about that.
Great. I have put my hand up. I'm looking at this list, and the South Mercer play fields, the synthetic turf replacement and the backstop upgrades. The one ball field there is the high school girls softball field. And I'm just wondering if this includes that upgrade to put it at the same level as the high school boys baseball field that had the complete turfing a few years ago at Island Crest Park. Because that's a Title IX issue.
Yeah, so the project right now, and Jason or one of my colleagues will jump in, is to replace the infield turf, if I recall correctly, and upgrade the backstops. It is not a full field turf replacement. Am I correct on that? Remind me of the process, reason that we aren't full turf on all those fields. It's school district property. Had that been considered previously? I wasn't here when those were. Does anyone recall?
Yeah, fields were installed in 2010. The infields were the piece that were only prescribed at the time. The outfields, which remain grass. This project is the infield, but the backstops will be looked at. We do understand there needs to be an apples to apples discussion with the school district regarding both facilities. So that will be included.
So Chair McCarthy, what I might recommend, since this was an intro tonight, I will ask Jason, maybe you and I can follow up on this tomorrow. We could talk to the school district about whether or not one of the fields could be all turf. And then you could recommend to your colleagues at the next meeting that additional resources be added to do that project, just knowing that we would still have a lot of work to do to find out if it's even possible through the property owners.
Most definitely, but I would hope that the school district would be amenable to it, since it is their students who are actually benefiting. And it's not all of the field, it's only the field that's used by the girls softball team that would have to look at being all turfed to match the boys at Island Crest Park. Thank you. All right, Marie has her hand up.
So, thanks, Commissioner Coleman, for your comments, because I really do appreciate that. But I still think Pioneer Park has been underrepresented in both the 20-year plan and the 6-year plan. There's only one project specific to Pioneer Park in the 6-year plan. The other 4 projects are of unknown allocations. And I do think property acquisition for $2 million over the next 6 years is seriously underfunded. We just spent more than $1 million to buy one lot in the city. So, it seems to me almost gratuitous to put $2 million in for the next 6 years. So I guess I'm disappointed, and I have to say I was not aware of this meeting until this afternoon. So I haven't really had a chance to look at things through and through. But I would very much like to have an isolated conversation about Pioneer Park with the trust, so that we make sure that the trust board's input is considered. And I do think, I'll just say this, I think the 6-year plan kind of highlights a concern that has been sort of talked about on the edges for a long time, which is the community, for very good reasons, set up Pioneer Park as an isolated jurisdiction. But the fact of the matter is we have many open spaces in the city of Mercer Island. Some of them are easy to sort of identify as exclusively open space, but then there's places like Mercerdale, which are partly, wild areas and partly not. But I think this 6-year plan kind of indicates the need to have a more coordinated approach to how we prioritize and what we do in our open spaces. So that's my 2 cents.
Vice Chair Struck.
Yes, thank you, Peter Struck. So Jesse, first, just a kind of logistical. So looking at the 6-year listing, I think it would be helpful. Maybe you have it, I just didn't print it out, but if we could look at the sort by the target completion date, so you'd kind of be here's what we're going to do in 23, 24, 25, just a different look. I think that would be helpful. And then the ongoing, you could put it in a separate spot as well. But the real question, more substantive question is, so just taking a look at 2023, how much flexibility is there really in terms of move? So if I came in and said, well, I've got 4 projects here that are scheduled in 2026, and I think they should be moved to 2023, vice versa. I mean, how much flexibility is there? I guess I want to try to level set as to, if there's projects that have to go in 2023, come heck or high water, maybe those should be bolded to say, you know what, for safety reasons, the Luther Burbank dock project, those just got to go. So, don't waste your time contemplating, well, maybe it could go somewhere else.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. And in November, I was hoping to tee up a presentation that would talk a little bit more about these specific projects. But we're also managing just sheer volume. So we can't just move them all forward. You have limited resources. We have to be able to design and bid and all that good stuff. And then we have to manage the construction project. So what we've attempted to do here is balance the projects out based on, our management and project management resources. So if, and unfortunately it depends. So if, depending on the project you pick to try to accelerate, we would be able to say yay or nay to that. Like the shoreline projects, those often take 2 to 3 years of design and permitting. And so we would have limited ability to accelerate. Your question about is, 2023, 24, are those pretty fixed? Yeah, a lot of them are. The turf replacements, we're going to be up against, you guys know we do the compaction testing on the fields. We're going to be up against failed compaction tests at some point. And then what happens is if we have to close the field. So I would be happy to work with the staff team to, walk you through those nuances of timing. The key word is nuance. The other thing I will say is, back to Marie, your point, I agree land acquisition is underfunded. I just don't know how to pay for it. So that's part B of the conversation is, we'll talk more about revenue. I put this in the staff report. the finance director right now is working on a long-term financial forecast. And we're a little ahead of the budget process with our work. So he'll get that information to us. We'll be able to forecast REIT. That's one of your revenue sources. We'll take a look at impact fees. We'll also think out, grants, but I can tell you our existing revenue comes nowhere near being able to support what we have on this list. So that's going to be one of our pretty tricky conversations. I wanted to show everything here though that we felt we needed. We also pulled some projects forward just based on public comment, some of the trails projects, because trails was so high. So some of these projects may actually fall off the list as we work through revenue forecasts. It's a challenge, right now.
So thank you for that. Just to kind of circle back. So from a commissioner's perspective, between now and the November meeting, kind of given that, there's a lot of variables, we have very few of them. We'll get a lot more. What are we supposed to be doing? Other than maybe familiarizing ourselves with the projects, but should we come back with a list of saying, well, I'd like this here, this there, or just say that that's kind of a waste of time because there's just too many other factors to consider?
Sure. Well, a good example that, Chair McCarthy just raised was, hey, I support this project, but I think it should be expanded to include synthetic turf in the outfield. So I'd be looking for, is this the right list, the 6-year list?
Okay.
Are things in generally the right order? And I know that's I know how hard this is, right? Because so much of this conversation is related to technical and operations information that we have, but we'd be happy to talk about it. Is it the right number? You've got a lot of ongoing commitments, and I'll resort this document a little differently next time. Do numbers need to go up, down? And then really, obviously the important piece, and I think where we're going to struggle a bit is when we lay in the revenue. How might we, what might we do here? And I will remind you that one of your next big tasks will be assisting the council with the Luther Burbank levy renewal discussion. So I'm going to plant a seed that, ballot measures are a potential, albeit sometimes difficult option to fund some of these projects.
I'm going to jump over to Commissioner Markson because she hasn't had very many opportunities to speak yet tonight.
Thanks. I was just, thinking about what Marie said, and when I was looking at the 6-year plan, I had assumed, I see a couple like forest management type or land management type funding items. And I think if it's possible is how sustainable that, like if that's sufficient funding. I guess I had in my head, well, they're putting money forward to maintain the parks, the open space that we have, but I would want to make sure that that is actually sustaining the open space that we have in a healthy way. Because I know they get a lot of wear and tear, so they probably do need quite a bit of support.
Commissioner Markson, I will just make a general comment. It's probably not enough. Elaine just popped her screen on. We're managing how many acres of open space?
I think by latest count, it was 282 acres of open space, 113 of which are Pioneer. So.
Yeah, okay.
Elaine, did you want to?
Okay, that's good. No, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up, Commissioner Markson. Elaine, did you want to talk about the funding, the ongoing funding and any other context you can provide? I didn't go into a lot of detail on that.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different things here, and I'll try and stay a little bit out of the weeds on specific funding, although I will note that currently part of open space is funded by a levy which expires in 2023. And part of that is specifically earmarked for Pioneer Park, and part of it is just for open spaces in general. I was just looking actually from Marie's comments, I was actually just looking at the amounts that we have in the 6-year plan for the different portions of open space. And actually I was finding that per acre open space that is not Pioneer Park is actually funded a little bit more than Pioneer Park. So, it's kind of an interesting metric. I will say that, you know, yes, we could be getting a lot more done in open space if there was better funding. And I know there has been interest in that. Certainly the survey showed that, but costs are going up significantly for restoration work, for contracted restoration work. You know, I'm thinking specifically about where we are in the 20-year management plan for Pioneer Park right now. It's calling for a lot of what we call comprehensive invasive removal, which is really sort of the big nitty gritty, you know, work that we need to do in those parks. And that's very expensive per acre. So, you know, looking at that on the horizon and staying on track with our management plan with current funding may be very difficult. So I suspect we'll see really similar metrics in the other open spaces also.
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful to know because, yeah, I certainly don't know how much something costs. And since it is kind of an ongoing need to fund, I guess I'm kind of thinking it would be like a policy directive maybe from the commission, like we need to maintain the open space that we have in a healthy way and depend on the city to fund it appropriately. I mean, I don't know if that, anyway, I don't know how that belongs in the facilities plan, but I would advocate for ensuring that was continued or added somehow.
If you don't mind, I'd love to add just one more bit to this, which I think, Sarah, it jogged my thought on this a bit, is that in terms of restoration in open spaces on the amount of acreage that the city has currently, we can go through it quite slowly, right? And we can make gradual progress over time. You know, ultimately what we're looking to get to is some sort of a stable state, right? Where we're really going in and doing more maintenance than complete overhauls of land and taking out big amounts of invasive plants. How fast we get to that stable state does to some degree depend on the funding. So like I said, we've been going at it. We have seen some budget reductions in years past that have kicked that program back to a maintenance only level. So we're not biting off new, we're really just maintaining the amount of restoration work that has already begun, making sure that it doesn't backslide at all. So if we're actually looking at making forward progress and really trying to bite off more land in restoration, I think that's your answer, is that it needs more inputs.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Cohen.
Don Cohen. I'm going to be a little less diplomatic about Pioneer Park than I was before. I mean, Pioneer Park is one of the principal trail gems on the island. We just heard that it's about 30+% of the open space on the island. We had specific outreach to the BMX people, to the Mercer Park playground people. If we didn't engage with the trust, the Open Space Conservancy Trust, that's a shame. And I want to see that done. And I would be unhappy and uncomfortable voting on things if that isn't done. I'm not saying to accept everything that they suggest, but we need to engage as much as possible. Thank you.
Okay, do we have anything else to cover for tonight then?
Not for me, thank you.
All right. So if that is the case and nobody else has any more comments, Then I will try and
Sorry,
find,
Chair McCarthy.
yes.
Can I just, this is not a comment. I was just wondering, did we get those files as tables that we could sort? And if I did, I'll go look for it. But I know I have a PDF version, so I can't look at it in different ways.
I don't have a shareable Excel file right now because of the way that spreadsheet is built and it's linked. I was contemplating how to do that. I could probably get the other one in Excel to you and break the links. I need to think about the capital 6-year plan document.
Marie?
Okay, that one's at least small. Yeah, thanks.
I was just gonna say, Sarah's comment is very relevant. I would love to get the tables in a way that I could rearrange them. I think it would help certainly me and probably the rest of the trust board to sort of think about where we fit in the budget. So thanks.
Okay. Okay, so with that, the next regular meeting, Parks and Recreation Commission meeting is November 4th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. The time is now 8:39 and the meeting is adjourned. However, as a reminder to commissioners, please stay seated until the city staff has terminated the Zoom broadcast. Good evening, stay safe and healthy.